What's up everybody, Captain Foggy here, and today we're going to take a look at Grixis Burn. Alright, key points to talk about with this deck. Primarily, it's a burn deck. It's utilizing Madness triggers and Prowess triggers. It's got a little light touch of control. We are running 10 creatures, 27 spells, and 23 lands. Let's start off with the creatures. First off, we have Stormchaser Mage. It's a flying haste prowess creature. It is a 1/3, so it's got a good decent bit of toughness. Of course, helps us escape our own Sweltering Suns with the prowess trigger. Gets in for early damage, kind of helps put that early pressure on so we can whittle down our opponent along with the rest of the burn we're running. In the 3-drop slot, we're running Enigma Drake. It's a great new addition from MtG. It's another flyer, of course. Power is equal to the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. So since we're discarding a lot of cards, playing a lot of spells, it's really easy for this Enigma Drake to get pretty big. Later on in the game, it's easy for it to be a 10-4, for instance, or even bigger than that. We're just slinging spells and just dumping cards into our graveyard the whole time. Last creature we're running in this deck, we're running 2 copies of Bedlam Reveler. Since we're running a lot of instant or sorcery spells, it's easy to cheapen the cost on this creature. Of course, it's another prowess creature as well, 3/4 body, so it escapes the dreaded Sweltering Suns in the deck as well. My creature choices in this deck, I chose them based on whether or not it could escape my own Sweltering Suns. If it couldn't, then it wasn't making the cut, which is the reason why you don't see something like Mercurial Geist in this deck, for instance. Another payoff with the Bedlam Reveler, when Bedlam Reveler enters the battlefield, discard your hand, then draw 3 cards. So it helps us dig deeper into our deck a little bit about in the midpoint of the game. Plus also, if we have any other spells in our hand that say we couldn't play, or it's a madness spell like Fiery Temper or Alms of the Vein, helps us get that off as well. Moving on to the burn spells, which is kind of the meat and potatoes of this deck, we are running a playset of Fiery Temper and a playset of Alms of the Vein. Those are our madness spells for the deck. 3 damage or 3 life and you gain 3 life. That's what you want to be doing with this deck. Also, we're running 3 copies of Cut to Ribbons. Cut is probably one of my favorite spells in the entire deck. Dealing 4 damage for only 2 mana to target creatures, pretty much where you want to be at early on. Kills pretty much most everything in the format. There's not much it can't touch except for maybe a Bristling Hydra every once in a while, which is, you'll notice later on, kind of the bane of my existence when I'm playing this deck. Also, the ribbons half of this deck helps us close out the game later on. If we're going up against anything that's creature light and we can't get off that cut, even in the sideboard, we don't usually sideboard all of these out. We might take 1 out in the sideboard perhaps, because we still want to utilize that ribbons part, and we can always discard this from a Cathartic Reunion or a Geier Sanitarium to still get that ribbons off in the back end. Double black's pretty easy for us to get with our mana base, so not really too worried about it, but at the same time, there have been some situations where, you know, we can't get that double black off. As far as other burn spells, we're running 4 copies of Shock. Deals 2 damage to target creature or player. This is great for extra reach. Also, can redirect damage to planeswalkers to kind of help mitigate that early on threat as well. Some people would say probably run Magma Spray over this. In most cases, you'd be right. I do have the Magma Sprays in the sideboard for that reason, but we are a burn deck. We're trying to burn our opponent out, so that is the main reason why I chose Shock over Magma Spray in this instance. Otherwise, we are running 3 copies of Sweltering Suns. Deals 3 damage to each creature on the board. Plus, it's got cycling for 3. Discard this card, you get to draw a card. That's actually the main reason why I'm running this over, say, something like Radiant Flames. Now, Radiant Flames would go good in this deck as well because it's pretty easy for us to get 3 colors off since we are Grixis colors. However, it's easier for me to get the 2 red than it would be to get, say, a red, a black, and a blue at any given moment to maximize that damage with Radiant Flames. Therefore, we're running Sweltering Suns over that. Otherwise, finishing off our spells as far as removal and burn, we are running 3 copies of Fatal Push, one of the best removal spells in the format at the moment if you ask me. Destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 2 or less. A lot of your threats have converted mana cost 2 or less, especially things like Heart of Kirin, for instance. Also, you know, if say for instance they kill one of our creatures or something like that, you know, we can also get it off with that Revolt trigger, destroy target creature if it has converted mana cost 4 or less instead. So definitely a good card for us to be running since we are running black at all in this deck. Obviously we're not running a whole lot of other colors other than red. Blue's really in this deck for our creature base. Black's in there for Alms of the Vein, and well, while I was at it, I thought I'd just go ahead and run 3 copies of Fatal Push. Moving on to our Madness enablers, we have 2 copies of Tormenting Voice. Very easy to just discard 1 card and draw a couple more cards and get off an Alms of the Vein or a Fiery Temper, or maybe even discard an unneeded land at the moment as well. 4 copies of Cathartic Reunion. Discarding 2 cards, drawing 3 cards for 2 mana, that's a great payoff for us. A lot of times I'll actually be able to play a Cathartic Reunion, discard 2 Fiery Tempers or 2 Alms of the Vein on turn 4, and that's a lot of value and payoff right there. If I got a Stormchaser Mage on the field at the same time, or even an Enigma Drake or anything like that, swinging for a lot of damage and burning for a lot of damage, gaining a little life, drawing some cards, what's not to love about that? That's value written all over it. My last and final Madness enabler I've got in the deck is Geier Sanitarium, running a 1 of, since it does have that legendary typing on it. Don't really want to see more than one of these in a game as it is, but pay 2 and tap it. Each player discards a card, then discards a card. Puts your opponent in a bad situation when he's got a whole lot of cards in his hand that maybe he doesn't really want to get rid of, but now you got to make a hard choice. So otherwise helps us draw deeper into our deck, helps us discard a Fiery Temper or Alms of the Vein, or even a Cut to Ribbons if we don't have any viable targets for the cut portion of that. And all in all, wonderful card. One of the better cards you could probably put in this deck land-wise. Otherwise, moving on to the land base, we are running 4 copies of Aether Hub, 2 copies of Canyon Slough with that double Swamp Mountain typing, 4 copies of Foreboding Ruins, 4 basic mountains, 4 copies of Spirebluff Canal, 2 copies of Sunken Hollow, and 2 copies of Wandering Fumarole. I wouldn't mind running a few more copies of Wandering Fumarole, however, that coming into play tapped part of the wording on the card can sometimes mess you up a little bit, especially when you're trying to curve out and actually go off kind of in a pseudo storm fashion, I suppose. Otherwise, it is a great late game threat as well when I have nothing else better to do with my mana. Again, I wouldn't mind running a few more copies, but in testing, running any more than 2 kind of gets in the way, especially since Spirebluff Canal more times than not comes into play untapped as it is. Moving on to the sideboard, we are running 3 copies of Transgress the Mind. This card is great against Planeswalkers, other control matchups. One of the easiest ways for me to get rid of a Bristling Hydra before it actually comes into play. Again, Hydra, one of the better creatures in the standard format currently, definitely one of my favorite creatures. I love playing it in my Teamer Energy deck or even the red-green Pummeler deck. Otherwise, it's great in anything green if you can at least produce enough energy to keep it rolling. But one really hard threat to get rid of. This is an easy way to get rid of it before it can actually become a thing at all. Moving on, we have 2 copies of Dispel for other control matchups. You know, if they're trying to remove one of my few creatures, I can usually dispel it away. If it's an instant speed removal like Fatal Push tends to hit me pretty hard actually usually. Also, if I'm trying to burn out, you know, maybe get off a Cathartic Reunion, it's terrible whenever you're discarding useless cards to a Cathartic Reunion and then they counter your Cathartic Reunion. Then what are you left with? Nothing, unfortunately. So Dispel definitely comes in handy with that. Otherwise, we are also running 3 copies of Negate. This is great against other Planeswalkers, other cards that we can't burn away like enchantments. So definitely an auto include if you ask me if you're playing any kind of blue at all. Moving on, we are running 3 copies of Thing in the Ice. This is kind of like a secondary sweeper against other aggro matchups. Also, that 7/8 on the other side is just beautiful. I mean, it's a big creature, beats in for a lot of damage, along with that burn too as well. It's very easy for us to flip the Thing in the Ice. Otherwise, I'm kind of playing around with this card a little bit. Drake Haven, it's an enchantment. Whenever you cycle or discard a card, you may pay 1 mana. If you do, create a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. So obviously, we're discarding a lot of cards with this deck. Sometimes, especially in the later parts of the game, we do have plenty of mana to throw around. So, you know, get off a Geier Sanitarium or a Tormenting Voice or a Cathartic Reunion, and we can make a few creatures in the process as well while we burn out our opponent. I hadn't really had a chance to really use this enchantment yet because you know, I added it to the sideboard, and unfortunately, even whenever I've sided it in, it is a single copy. You don't see it very often, so I haven't had an opportunity to see whether or not it actually shines or not, but we're still going to keep it in the sideboard in hopes that maybe it's actually going to come in handy one day. Already mentioned Magma Sprays earlier on in the video. They are in the sideboard, 3 copies of it. Magma Spray is in here against zombies, Scrap Heap Scrounger, anything else recurring that it can actually hit, plus also utilizing the rest of our burn package that we're using. It's not uncommon for us to say be able to burn something out and then finish it off with a Magma Spray and get it exiled as well, especially combat. You know, Stormchaser Mage swings in, gets blocked, Magma Spray the other creature, and that's a pretty good even trade. Well, that's it for today. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Are there any card suggestions you would make for the main deck or the sideboard? I would love to hear your feedback. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss anything from Mindsculpting MTG. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next upkeep.